Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Tank Talk Podcast. That's right. You're here because you know, as well as we do, that this is the #1 aquarium podcast in this universe and all parallel universes combined. And we really appreciate you being part of this. John, what do we got going on today?
We have the first of many special things that we're going to be doing with this podcast. You know what? For the longest time, I have been afraid to expand this podcast out because I was limited with the internet service that I had available. But now I've got the 2 gig fiber internet. Now we can go all in and we can do whatever we want to do. And because of that, we're going to start bringing in expert level guests into this podcast, people that we know can add to the valuable information that we give you on this podcast. We're not going to be bringing in guests every single week because that would just be too complicated. But today is the first episode where we are bringing in a guest. But I'm going to let you do the honors, Jason. I'm going to let you say who it is because this is a really big deal. This guy is very much sought after. Very few people can land him. We are lucky to get him as a guest, but I'm going to let you say who that is.
So before I say who it is, what I would like to say is you and I had talked about doing a podcast on invertebrates and especially shrimp. And then we talked about it more like, well, wait a minute. We need to bring the foremost awesome person, expert in the area to talk about this. And we decided that none other than Rob Lupton of Flip Aquatics, you needed to be here to talk about shrimp. How's everything?
What an honor. I mean, first of all, to be invited to be a part of literally the best aquarium podcast in the world. I think, is that what it is? In the world?
No, you missed it. It was in the universe and all parallel universes.
Wow. So, I mean, you guys have given me an honor of my life, and I just appreciate you letting me have that. And to be your first guest, I mean, that is an honor in and of itself. So always a pleasure to be invited to hang out with you guys and be a part of what you're doing. And I always love what you guys are doing. So it's awesome to be here. And thanks for having me.
Well, we're glad you're here.
Listen, let me just interrupt, Jason. Rob, I got a call from Joe Rogan last week, and he was like, dude, I have to be on this podcast. And I said, hey, who do you think you are? No,
week two of guests.
We are bringing in Rob Lupton because he's got something to bring to the table. You ain't got nothing for us there, Joe.
No, Joe's pretty good, but he's not that good.
No, he's overexposed. So I thought it would be cool. Can we just take a second, talk about your background? Like, how did you go from Rob Lupton, the human being, to Rob Lupton, the wonderful shrimp keeper who's got this massive business now? Like, what brought you to this point in a short version, the Cliff Notes version?
Okay. So, I mean, passion, I guess. I have a passion for aquariums and I have a passion for business. I've always had a love for animals. I found a love for aquariums when I was like 18 or 19 and just like went head over heels for them. I've always had a passion for business. I went to school for business, and, it just kind of combining my two things. Anytime you can do something you love, you want to do that. And I was able to do 2 things I love. I love business. I love aquariums, and I merged them. And so for me, I started off as like, I wanted to make a difference in the hobby that I love. For me, I was buying shrimp as a hobbyist and getting unhealthy shrimp, getting shrimps with parasites, with diseases. And so there was a lot of things going wrong in my journey. And I was like, man, it'd be really great if there was a place that I could just go and get everything I need. It's a trusted source, it's bred in the United States or quarantined or whatever it is. And I kept trying all these different sources and they kept disappointing me. And so finally at age like 21, 22, I was like, you know what do I have to lose? I got the rest of my life ahead of me. If I fail, it's not a big deal. I can kind of just shoot for the moon. And I did that. And it isn't like, I did it and it was overnight success, because it's always an uphill climb. And there was very many tough years. I've been doing it we just had our 10-year anniversary. So a little over 10 years. The first 3 years were extremely challenging. You're working full time in another job to pay for this job, which is losing money. And so it's literally one of these things that you just like, you do because you love it, not because you're trying to get rich or make any money. You literally just love what you do. And, I'm fortunate enough to have stuck with it for long enough and made enough good decisions that it all worked out. And for me, I always give glory to God. I think God put me in the right place with the right people at the right time. And that's how I got to where I am today. So if you want, I can share a little bit about where we are today. Or since this is the world's best, the universe's best podcast, I don't want to interject. You guys let me know the direction we go next.
Here's what I'm really curious about. When you got into aquariums, did you start with fish or did you immediately gravitate towards shrimp?
Oh, that's a great question. So initially when I got into fish tanks, it wasn't even my fish tank. It was someone else's. And, we were buying fish for this fish tank and bringing life to it. And I just enjoyed it. So like, I think my first fish was like a balloon molly, like little ugly, cute stinker. And then they had babies. And I thought that was the coolest thing ever. And then next thing you know, I'm getting plants and I'm like, oh my God, like having this little ecosystem is just so cool. And I ended up loving it so much that they gave the aquarium to me. And then when I had it on my own, I have all these fish and I have these plants and I'm doing the substrate with the dirt, with the fertilizer. I'm making mistakes. And then I decide, my neighbor, I get him back into it. And he's like, man, I really want to feed I won't bore you with the details, but he had an alligator. And he's like, I really want to feed my alligator some ghost shrimp. I was like, well, I could probably breed those for you. Like, that's a project I would enjoy. So I tried breeding ghost shrimp and it didn't work out. And then I tried breeding cherry shrimp because, that's the next best thing. Everyone says they're easy. And I just absolutely fell in love. Soon as I got cherry shrimp the first time, I was like, yeah, this is my jam. And I don't know why. I don't know what it was. But like just having a tank of cherry shrimp was like the coolest thing ever. And so then I'm getting the blue ones. I'm getting the tiger shrimp. I'm trying the carbon realies. I'm trying the orange pumpkins. And next thing you know, like I'm just hooked. And like all my tanks end up being all shrimp tanks. And, I'm posting videos on YouTube. People are loving it. The hobby is exploding. And it was just kind of like it happened naturally. But no, I didn't start in shrimp. Shrimp was kind of a natural evolution. And then once you know you love something, like you can't get enough of it. And that was shrimp for me.
Well, it's got to be hard to keep your shrimp populations up when you're always giving them to your buddy to feed to an alligator. I mean,
yeah. So my poor buddy, he ended up never getting any. So I feel bad.
You love them so much. You were like, here, buddy, take all of my shrimp. And now they're food. I love you, little red cherry shrimp. Here you go, alligator. Is that how it went?
No. So I got them to raise for him so that I could give him the baby so he could feed to his alligator.
So you mentioned now today obviously is a completely different situation. Tell us more about where Rob Lupton, Flip Aquatics, what is this today?
So, yeah, I mean, that's a loaded question, or it's a loaded question. There's a lot of facets to that. And I'll try to give you the Cliff Notes version of it. So we started off in shrimp, and that's where I found my passion. That's where I really grew the business, really made a name for Flip Aquatics and myself. We started off with breeding shrimp, and then we kind of transitioned to importing just because, I've shared this, countless times, but we just could not breed enough to keep up with demand. And so the only solution to be able to compete with these people that I feel like were ruining the hobby through bad practices was to start importing. And then we started doing quarantine, and then that really grew the business. And then, I mentioned earlier when I first got into the hobby, I loved fish, I loved plants. And so my next thing was like, it'd be cool to get some snails. And then I was like, with snails, like it'd be cool to get some plants. And then the biggest transition we made was like, hey, like we should sell fish. John, I know that you sold bettas for a period, and shipping fish across the country is a very difficult thing. And so for like 3 years, we like hit our head against a wall trying to like crack the code to shipping fish across the country. And so now fast forward to today, 10 years into the business, we still do a ton of shrimp. We have, I want to say about 200 shrimp aquariums. We got about 350 fish aquariums. We got about 100 probably 100 snail aquariums. So like we have a lot of things going on. We got some breeding going on. We got the hard goods. And so we're a company of about 15 to 20. It fluctuates. And so we've come a long way, but we have a long way to go. I mean, you guys know this hobby's huge, and there's still plenty of businesses out there that I feel like don't hold themselves to a standard. They just they're in it to turn and burn and make a profit. And so we're really trying to expand, not because hey, Rob Lupton wants to make a lot of money. And no, it's because Rob Lupton really wants to make a difference in the hobby. And it starts with, people being able to get quality livestock that's going to live in their aquarium, good information, and all the things that go into that. So that's kind of where we're at today, and a quick little synopsis of how we got there.
I can definitely appreciate that, because I've always worked under the philosophy of, if we do the right things and we do the things that we're supposed to do for the love of this hobby, to benefit the hobby, everything else will fall into place. The money will come, and, all of that will be fine. And so doing the right thing is, and that's what you do. And that's why I demanded that you be the first guest on this podcast. I didn't even have to debate Jason on it. He was like, yes, absolutely. We got to bring in Rob. So we know a little bit now about your history and Flip Aquatics, the origins and all of that. Now let's get into these little critters, these little boogers that swim around. And they don't really swim. They flutter and walk around and do all of that. I'm somebody that I talk to fish keepers that are brand new. They just came into this. And I think that it's very possible that a lot of people come into this hobby because they see those shrimp and they're like, holy cow, that's the coolest thing I've ever seen. I want to start my hobby with shrimp. I know you probably wouldn't recommend that, but what do you recommend for the beginner shrimp keeper? And I guess the best thing would be beginner shrimp keeper, not necessarily beginner fish keeper. Somebody that already understands how aquariums work and all of that, but they want to get into shrimp. What would be your beginner advice for them?
Yeah. So, I mean, the biggest thing is knowing that shrimp and fish are completely different, and not in like, hey, you need to understand different things. You need to know different water parameters. Like, they're not like super different. It's just know before we get into anything else that they are different. So there are things that you're going to have to do in a different way. So somebody that understands aquariums, the basic of aquariums, where would I start with shrimp? I would start with, and I think this applies to anything, is deciding what you want to keep first. So with shrimp, there's a bunch of different types of shrimp. And for the most part, there's different categories. So genus, there's the Neocaridina side, which likes hard water, a high pH. And then there's the Caridina side, which likes soft water and a low pH. Now, that doesn't always apply. So it isn't like one size fits all in each category, but it gives you an idea of where to start. So if we're going to be talking about, cherry shrimp, that's probably the easiest one to keep, because the majority of water throughout the United States is going to be hard. There are places in the United States, like Seattle, for example, that has really soft water that would be more geared for Caridina shrimp. So my biggest piece of advice always is deciding what you want to keep, and then we can reverse engineer it from there.
If we were to, it can be really confusing for a new fish keeper and especially a new shrimp keeper. There seems to be like so many different types of shrimp. Can you break it down in a really easy way to understand? Like, what are the main types of shrimp, and how are they different from one another?
Okay, so yeah, you got the easiest way to break it down is you have Neocaridina. So everyone knows what a cherry shrimp is, or at least I won't say everyone, because this is the universe's greatest podcast for aquariums. And so there's going to be a couple of people out there that probably have never heard of a cherry shrimp. But a cherry shrimp is the most common Neocaridina type shrimp. Now, Neocaridina encompasses all different variations of a cherry shrimp. So you have blue types, you have black, you have orange, you have red. You have ones that are multicolored, so they have like a black head, black tail, and a clear midsection. And there's just a bunch of different variations within Neocaridina. Now, all Neocaridina shrimp prefer harder water. That means that they like a water with a general hardness that is pretty high, a carbonate hardness that is pretty high, which we could get into like specific water parameters later on if we have time for it. But for the most part, hard water is considered something that has a GH like, above, I would say 5. and then a KH of like 2 or higher. Now, again, we can get into that, but in my mind, Neocaridina hard water means a pH above 7. So alkaline, not acidic. Now, Caridina, on the other hand, that's where you're going to get the super colorful shrimp. You're going to get things like crystal red shrimp, which are white and red. You're going to get crystal blacks, which are white and black. You're going to get like the King Kongs, like a blue bull, which is a Taiwan bee, and they're solid blue and they're gorgeous. And then you're going to get these super unique ones like Galaxy Pintos and red fancy tigers. Now, all these are mixes of different types of Caridina shrimp, and they all stem from like, very particular types. And so tangerine tigers is one of the main ones that they breed with like a crystal red to get all these new morphs and forms. And so anything that is like multicolored, really cool patterns normally is going to fall on the Caridina side. And 90% of all the Caridina shrimp like acidic water. They like a pH of less than 7. They don't want any KH in their water. They want a GH of under, or like 5 or under. Now, there are very specific ones that fall outside of that range that might like super hard water, but a low pH. And so it's very interesting. But the easiest way to break it down is there's 2 types of shrimp. There is soft water shrimp, and then there's hard water shrimp.
All right. So then now, going back to what I said earlier, that I'm the beginner guy. I've always called myself, I've always been a beginner fish keeper. Like, so when you have that person that comes to you and says, I want to get into shrimp, but I'm really good at killing things in my aquarium. I need to know what is the easiest shrimp to keep, but I have a rule for you, Rob Lupton, and that is you're not allowed to say Amanos or ghost shrimp. What would be your suggestion for the most foolproof, bulletproof, easiest easiest shrimp to keep in the hobby?
So let me ask you a question then to make sure I give you the right answer. Is money an issue?
Money's always an issue. When is that ever not but no, let's say, this is a person that is willing to put out the money, but, doesn't want to go broke, especially since they've never kept shrimp before.
Okay, so perfect. There's 2 approaches. The first approach is if you're willing to spend the money up front to have the correct setup, then my answer is always going to be different. And so if you're the type of person that's like, hey, I'm going to go to my local fish club, I'm going to bid on a bag of shrimp that I've never seen before, and I'm going to put them in my aquarium. And if they make it, great. If they don't make it, they're probably too sensitive. Now, that person, I'm going to give the basic answer of like, hey, like I would probably go with a Blue Dream. Blue Dream is one of those shrimp that when we bring them in, they're the ones that rarely ever have issues. A lot of people say cherry shrimp because they're the same genus. But the thing is, cherry shrimp have a lot less care that goes into them because they're much less expensive. Whereas Blue Dreams have a lot more care that goes into them because they want that really nice blue color. The more blue it is, the higher the quality. And so over in Taiwan, where they breed most of these shrimp, they're willing to put more effort into making sure these things are healthy and look good. And so when we bring them in, those are the ones that we have the least amount of issues with. So that's for the person that just wants to buy a bag of shrimp and put them in their aquarium and roll the dice and hope that they do good. Now, if you're the type of person that's like, hey, I'm willing to put in the work and make sure that I have the appropriate setup for shrimp. If that's the case, then I'm really going to recommend tangerine tigers. So it sounds like a very out there kind of answer, but here's the thing. Tangerine tigers are the #1 shrimp for crossbreeding. So it's the type of shrimp that everyone makes. These new red fancy tiger shrimp, these black fancy tigers, this speckled stardust, like almost all of those crosses can be traced back to tangerine tigers. And there's one reason for it, is tangerine tigers are the most hardy, most prolific breeders out there. But you have to have an appropriate setup. Now, they can live in a lot of parameters, but if you're willing to do the work up front, if you're willing to invest in some distilled water, a remineralizer that you can set the GH and KH to exactly where you want it. If you're willing to get the specific substrate that you need, and you're willing to do all that research and know exactly what you need to do, tangerine tigers are going to be little cockroaches and they're going to breed like crazy for you.
It's so surprising because I'm going to be honest. I'm one of those guys that has killed a lot of shrimp, and it really hurts my feelings. And where I've had my most success was with just regular old cherry shrimp. And I've got a 20-gallon tank right now, heavily planted. That is just a breeding ground for these fish. Why do I keep doing that, Rob? I'm not used to this. So I automatically assumed you were just going to say, oh, red cherry shrimp. Yep, easy peasy.
Yeah, and it's just one of those things, like, you know, it's all situational. So, you know, if I have a line of cherry shrimp that I've been working with for 20 years and I breed them all the time, then there's a chance that I'm probably going to recommend them. But for us who bring in, you know, like hundreds of thousands of shrimp every single year, we get a huge, you know, snapshot into quality and health. And so it's much easier for us to say like, oh yeah, this one for sure is always going to do better, and this one is the best option. Because the other thing that I didn't even touch on is Neocaridina shrimp in general. There's less care that goes into them because they can breed them outdoor in ponds. So like over in Taiwan, they can breed them outside. So there's, you know, mosquito larvae, there's bird poop, there's things falling into there. There might be a bird that dies and falls in there and then pollutes the whole tank. Next thing you know, you have these weird funguses. And so there's a lot less care that goes into that. Whereas on like the tangerine tiger side, the Caridina side, those are bred indoors in actual aquariums at mass production. And so something that's bred inside is obviously going to get a lot more care than something that just naturally breeds outside that they sell for pennies on the dollar. And so just for that reason, like, you know, if we're talking imported shrimp, then that's why I have that opinion. Now, if you're local to a fish club and you have a guy that has this strain of cherry shrimp like John, then getting cherry shrimp from someone like that is going to be the easiest solution because they're already used to your local water. They can adjust to your tank really easy. So a lot of my things apply to like, if you were going to buy from Flip Aquatics, this is the information that I would give you up front. It doesn't apply to like every single situation out there.
I just need to say for the record, and then I'm going to turn it over to Jason. I'm pretty confident the shrimp I have came from you. I'm just saying.
Hey,
I'm pretty confident. I don't know for certain, but I'm pretty confident that's where they came from.
That's awesome.
It's probably why they've bred so prolifically.
Hey, I'll take it. Thank you, John.
I've got some blue dreams I got from you, and they're in a 40 breeder, and they are the most beautiful blue. And I've had this strain for years and years, and they're outstanding. Now, here's a question I get a lot. Ghost shrimp, because we haven't talked about him yet. It's one of the most common shrimp in the hobby. People go to Petco, they go to PetSmart. It's sometimes the only shrimp available. They grab 20 of them, and it's always the same story. I got 20 of these ghost shrimp, and like 2 months later, they're all dead. So how do ghost shrimp compare to what we've already talked about? Are they a good alternative to some of what you've talked about in a community aquarium? Like, what goes wrong with them where people have such generally bad luck so often?
Yeah, and for ghost shrimp, like I'm going to be honest, I haven't kept ghost shrimp in probably 9 years, like maybe sooner than that. It's been a while. So here's the thing with ghost shrimp. You go to the store, and I don't know what they would be today, but I would imagine you can get them for like 4 for $1 or 50 cents a piece. And that means that the person that is initially selling that ghost shrimp is probably charging a penny. Like they're probably doing like this huge bag. You get a whole box and it's $50 shipped. And then they're selling it to the distributors. Distributors are marking it up. And then by the time it gets to the pet store, they have already operated off of losing 75% of them. They only have 25% left, and they're still able to sell it for 50 cents or $1. And so the quality of that animal is so deteriorated at that point. It's been through so much stress that there's no wonder why they don't last very long. If you get a ghost shrimp to last more than a month, I'm like, hey, you're killing it. You're not killing it. You're actually keeping it alive, but you're doing a phenomenal job. And so for me, ghost shrimp they're not naturally like a good freshwater shrimp. They're one of those shrimp that's brackish water. The actual shrimp lives up the stream of brackish water, but like they have a larva state that goes down into the brackish water, turns into the regular shrimp, goes back up the stream. And so they're very similar to like in a mono shrimp, but a lot less stable. And so I would say if you're able to keep them alive, you're doing great. If you're not, don't feel bad at all, because 99% of the time it's the quality of the animal.
And I've always maintained that to me, ghost shrimp aren't really necessarily supposed to be sold as pets. They're really food. That's why they're so cheap,
Yeah,
right? So
100%.
it's almost like a snack for some of your smaller cichlids or something.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah, that's exactly how I mean, I've always assumed they're just feeders. I mean, that's what people, you go to the fish store, sometimes you still see it, and there's a whole tank full of them, and it just looks like snow all throughout the tank. And it's like, oh, those are, I don't remember the last time I bought them. I don't think I ever have, but I think they were like 10 for $1. Shows you how long ago that was. But you mentioned Amano shrimp, and I mentioned them earlier. It's another fish that we have.
Shrimp.
There I went again. It's another.
Hey, let's go.
I don't know.
We're
why
gonna
I keep
fix it
doing
by
that.
the end of this live stream.
It's another shrimp that I have. I don't. Lisa does, and we've had for a very long time. Amano shrimp, and I got to say these are one of my absolute favorites because they are so much bigger. And I'm 50 years old. I'm so much older than you, Rob, and my eyesight is not the best anymore. And so some of the little cherries and stuff, I have a little hard time seeing them. The Amanos are like huge. They're like lobsters. But what can you tell people about keeping Amanos?
Yeah. So first of all, the reason Amanos are so popular is because originally they were introduced as algae eaters. So like, do they eat algae? Absolutely they do. I mean, all shrimp eat algae. But the reason that they've remained so popular is because they're so hardy. Now, John, you said like Amano shrimp get big, so it's easy to see them. Well, the cool thing about them getting so big is they can hold their own against a ton of fish. So like, whereas regular shrimp, cherry shrimp, like, you know, they're pretty small, they can get eaten up pretty easy. Amano shrimp can get up to like 3-4 inches. Like they can get massive. And so they can really hold their own in a fish tank. And so now the application for keeping shrimp is much wider, and where you can keep them with different fish, it gets bigger. And so obviously those are going to be the most popular. And then they've gotten so good over the years of like harvesting these Amano shrimp and how to transport them, because, you know, they're such a big seller, that the stability of those Amano shrimp is much better. And so Amano shrimp have been a huge seller for us. They're huge in the hobby, and it really comes down to the things that you can keep them with and how stable they truly are.
Nice.
That's pretty cool. And we've got some Amano shrimp, and they're huge compared to like the other shrimp that we have. And they do an awesome job of that green hair algae. I remember I got like a couple hundred of them, threw them in a 10-gallon, and I had all this Java moss that was mixed in with just all this green hair algae. And they were like little piranhas. Within a few days, I'm like, all I have left is Java moss. There's not a single shred of green hair algae left in that big giant bundle. So, all right, now so we haven't talked about this either. If someone were to say, okay, I've had the standard types of shrimp, I got some of the coolest shrimp from you ever, and I didn't realize they lived this long, and maybe it's unusual. I got bamboo shrimp from you at an Aquashella probably 5 years ago, and I still have them in my Blue Dream breeding tank, and they're still sitting up there on the air hose, and they're doing their thing. But are there other types of shrimp, bamboo shrimp included, that people can get that's just different?
Yeah, so bamboo shrimp is obviously one of them. There's another one that's very similar. It's called a vampire shrimp. It's slightly bigger, and they're beefy. We haven't been able to source them. They're not an easy thing to get in. So those would be like the two most common. Outside of that, there's a couple like different types of like sub Caridina species. Like we didn't even talk about Sulawesi shrimp. They're a very unique but extremely colorful shrimp. And they come from the Sulawesi Islands or the Sulawesi Lake system. And they're just extremely cool, but they need very weird parameters, like super high pH, but kind of like low pH. And so they're just very interesting. So those are always a fun one to breed. And then there's like different types of Bobolti shrimp, which is a Caridina species again. Bobolti, there's like green Bobolti, there's zebra Bobolti, and they're just wild type shrimp that are just extremely cool. And then the next kind of like step out of that would be like crayfish. So now I'm not talking like the big crayfish like you catch at the stream, like or in the swamps and stuff like that. There's like dwarf crayfish, which have been pretty popular over the last, like, I would say 4 to 5 years, because there's blue ones, there's orange ones. Like, I'm sure you guys have heard of like the CPO crayfish. And they're Mexican type crayfish. They're orange. They're beautiful. There's a blue variation of that. There's like a blue mini one that only gets like an inch big. And so for those people that want a a shrimp that's a little bit bigger, dwarf crayfish is the way to go. But full transparency, they're not legal in every state. So make sure to check your local state regulations to see if you can keep them.
It's such a shame that you have to put out disclaimers like that. I mean, why can't the government just stop messing with silly things, especially when it comes to things being kept in glass boxes? But anyway, we're not going to go down that rabbit hole. I told you earlier about my specific challenges that I had in the beginning, which my challenges were I just couldn't keep them alive. But what would you say is the most common challenges that people find when it comes to being new to shrimp keeping? I almost said fish, or even veterans that are struggling with something. What do you think are the biggest challenges that that are out there?
So, I mean, the biggest challenge for me, or that at least that I see, is that going back to the beginning, we talked about like fish and shrimp are different. So a fish, let's talk about what happens if a fish gets stressed. If a fish gets stressed, if it gets too cold, if a sudden change happens, the pH fluctuates, it might get ick. It might just sit in the water column for a little bit. You might be like, oh, it's acting weird. I got to do something. So like, they might die. Absolutely. They could die. And so like, that's what happens for a fish when it goes through stress. Shrimp, or invertebrates in general, most invertebrates, what do they do when they get stressed? They molt. Now, an early molt is one of the most stressful things because the animal's not ready for it. So like, one, they might get caught in the molt. They might molt early, and then the next time they go to molt, they don't have enough nutrients built up, and then they fail to molt, and then they die. And so a lot of people that get into the hobby treat shrimp like they do fish. They do these massive water changes, 20%. They do the finger test to make sure that the water is pretty close to the temperature of the water. They're really not worried about the parameters, like, it's tap water. I'm just going to put it in there. And then what they do is they make these sudden changes that cause their animals to molt, and then that makes it that much more difficult. So like shrimp molt on a 30-day cycle on average. Babies molt a lot more frequently because they're growing quicker, but like an adult shrimp, every 30 days they're going to molt. So if you're doing a massive water change every week or even bi-weekly, like, most of us fish keepers are like, yeah, you got to do it every other week or every week, 20%. Then what you're doing, if you're not careful, you're putting the shrimp through stress every week or every other week. That's probably causing a molt, which is going to lead to you not having success with that shrimp. And so that's the biggest issue that I find is people just don't take that into consideration. And that doesn't mean that shrimp are hard. It just means that they're different. And so sudden changes are never good because, if all of a sudden we're all sitting here, it's 80 degrees and we're like, oh my God, it's so nice. And then all of a sudden it's 60 degrees, even though 60 degrees is still nice. A change over like 5 minutes, we'd be like, oh my God, man, we're cold. Now you do that a couple times, we might get the flu. Like, it just weakens our immune system. And so it's the same thing. And so just applying, almost common sense practices to shrimp keeping will go a long way.
I have to confess something real quick. I know Jason has another question lined up, but I have to confess something. I have dabbled in saltwater. I have a saltwater tank now, but way back, and let it be mentioned, you were a guest on my live stream on the KG Tropicals channel in 2017. We go way back, me and you. I think we met in 2015. I'm not going to tell that whole story again, but
that was a good one.
I think it was like 20. I don't know when it was. It was around that time, like 2016, 2017. I had a little saltwater tank, and I bought one of the saltwater shrimp, which are absolutely fascinating. They're so cool. They look like spiders, and I'm terrified of spiders, but I did not realize that they molted. And so I come down one day and there is a shell laying there, and I'm like, daggone it. My fish ate that shrimp. They just ate all of it. No, don't correct me, Jason. My fish ate the shrimp. How dare you? I was right that time. I felt like it gutted that shrimp and ate it all out. Didn't even realize it. And then I'm sitting there looking at this shell laying on the substrate. And then here comes the shrimp coming up over the rock. And I'm like, what's happening here? This is another dimension or something. I did not realize, because I'm an idiot. I've never said I wasn't, that they actually dropped their shell and start all over again. It was wild. I'm embarrassed to admit that, but anyway, I'll pass it back over to Jason.
Hey, and real quick too, a little pro tip, at least something that the everyday hobbyist probably wouldn't know, is removing a molt is actually bad. So like whenever your shrimp molt, it's good to leave it in there because it's calcium. And so like they actually eat their own mold, and that's how they replenish a lot of their nutrients.
Oh, see, look at this. I told you he was the guy for all the information.
So you mentioned some of the issues. What would you say are the most common shrimp diseases, and how do you treat them? Because I mean, I know all about fish. You know, ick, you've got epi, you've got all these internal parasites, and for the most part, there's a pretty straightforward thing, but I am not nearly as familiar, and I'm sure a lot of our audience isn't either. If your shrimp are sick, so to speak, they're not acting right, you suspect they have some type of infection. What are those common infections, and what do you do about them?
Cool. So how much time do I have to get into this? I need to know, because I can hammer this home for a long time.
All the
Take
time
5
you
or 10
want.
minutes if you need to. Go.
Okay. So let me first start by saying that the number one issue why shrimp die is an uncycled aquarium. So if you have shrimp dying, don't jump to like, oh, something's wrong. Test your ammonia, test your NO2, test your NO3. Make sure that stuff's not high, not elevated. Hopefully there's none of it or very little of like NO3s. But that is the most common reason that shrimp die. And the reason that happens, shrimp in general are considered, in my opinion, like a negative bioload. They produce next to no waste whatsoever. So shrimp are also, a little expensive. They might be, $8 a piece. They might be $15, $20 a piece, depending on the ones you get. You might get them cheap, cherry shrimp, $3, $4 a piece. And so when something, I completely lost my train of thought.
Come on, I said you were a pro.
Give me the question again.
Water, so you were on common
yes, cycling an aquarium. That's funny. It doesn't happen to me very often. I'm just sitting here looking at John's bald head. I'm like, man, I got a bald head too.
Hey, I mean, you're looking at my bald head. You're bald, and so is Jason. How dare you? Why pick on me?
We're all bald. I don't know, man. It just happened. So anyway, back on track. So most people only buy 10 shrimp. And then when you get 10 shrimp don't produce much waste. And so next thing you know, 10 shrimp, they breed, they turn into 100 shrimp. All of a sudden, 100 shrimp produce enough waste. Now, all of a sudden, your ammonia is going to start getting elevated. Your NO2 is going to start getting elevated. Your tank's going to start cycling. And then all of a sudden, people have this crash. And so like that's the number one reason that shrimp die, is because it goes through that process. So a couple ways to prevent that is you can get snails. You can get some shrimp-safe fish. There's not very many, but there's like, otocinclus, things like that are going to be pretty safe. And we can even talk about that later on. So know that before we get too far. Now going into like common diseases, parasites, let's start with the easy one. So parasites, there aren't very many. There's a couple like things in a shrimp tank that might, prey on them. Like you've heard of like planaria, vorticilla. These are all like microorganisms that live in an aquarium that could sting the shrimp, could kill babies, things like that, which normally don't happen in a fish tank because the fish would just eat them. And so there's a couple things to watch for, and we'll talk about treatment of those. But as far as like, ones that actually attack the shrimp or like shrimp specific, there's one that's called Scutellaria. It is a little micro worm that attaches to the rostrum of the shrimp. Now, if you don't know what a rostrum is, pretend that my hat is my head and my head kind of, comes off the tip of my forehead. And all these little worms will attach to the top of my forehead or top of my hat. And then they don't actually hurt the shrimp. But what they do is they'll actually clog up their face. There'll be so many of them that the fish cannot eat. And then the fish will eventually starve to death. So to treat...
You mean the shrimp? He said fish. You didn't jump on
fish?
him, Jason. You did.
Did I say fish?
You did.
John's rubbing off on me. What is going on? So the shrimp will starve to death. I correct myself. Hey, at least you're not alone now.
I'm not the only one getting picked on in this episode.
No, absolutely not. So to solve that problem, what you do is the majority of any shrimp parasites are going to die when they are exposed to a salt dip. So aquarium salt, API aquarium salt, there's Fritz aquarium salt. There's a mixture online. I believe it's like 1 tablespoon of salt to 1 cup of water. Definitely look that up because I don't know it off the top of my head. but there is a ratio out there. And then you put your shrimp in there for about a minute, and the shrimp is going to be fine. We do this every single time we send out shrimp, just as like a safety precaution. And 99% of the time, the parasite will just fall off, die in the cup. You can treat it a couple times because a lot of these parasites, the Scutellaria, will lay eggs, which will get sucked into the gill of the shrimp. And then those eggs will hatch, and then they'll attach themselves back to the shrimp. So dipping them, probably 3 times, 3 days apart. So like day 1, day 3, day 6, you're going to be good to go. So it's like a 6-day process, and then you shouldn't have anything after that. If you have anything in your tank that is like a planaria or Scutellaria or Vorticilla, I forget which one it is, the ones that attach to the side of the tank. Do you guys remember what that's called? It's like the jellyfish one.
Oh, Hydra.
Hydra. That's what I was looking for. Hydra.
Yeah.
Scutellaria is the one that attached to their forehead, and then Hydra is the one. So if you have those in your aquarium, what we do is we use a dewormer to kill them, and then we just dose the whole tank. The only problem with that is it does mess with your biological filtration. So when doing it, it's always risky, and then also it can kill snails. So know that. And then moving on to like the actual sicknesses that shrimp will get. The main one that they will get is bacterial infection. Now, how do you tell it's a bacterial infection? You simply look at the color of their tissue. And so when their tissue starts getting like a white milky color, the majority of the time that is a bacterial infection. If it's a centralized milky color, so like it's just on the like core of their body and not like the exterior tissue, then it might be muscle necrosis, which is completely different. So don't confuse the two. Definitely look up a picture of muscle necrosis versus bacterial infection in shrimp before you make your call. And so the only thing with bacterial infections and telling the tissue is some shrimp have a solid color that you wouldn't be able to tell what color the tissue is. So you can take them out of your tank. You can shine a light underneath them. You can kind of tell that way. But if you can't tell, then the only thing that can really tell you for sure that it's a bacterial infection is when all of your parameters are correct and all of a sudden you're having shrimp deaths. So like if all of a sudden you're having a shrimp death here, now it's 2, now it's 3, 99% of the time, it's a bacterial infection. Bacterial infections are really easy to fix. We have a really good method for doing it. It works 100% of the time. We've never had something that has gone the distance and just crashed. We always get rid of the bacterial infection, and it's a product called Maricin. So we use Mardel Maricin and Maricin 2. Now, don't look at the bottle, dose your tank the way that it says. Shrimp are invertebrates. They need dose completely different. What we do is day 1, we do half dose. Day 2, we do a break. Day 3, we do a half dose. Day 4, we do a break. And then on day 5, we do a water change. We clean the filter, and then we dose the tank with live bacteria, because antibiotics, Maricin, kills all bacteria, good or bad. It doesn't discriminate. It kills it all. And so any live bacteria, nitrifying bacteria, is going to die. And so that's the most common thing that happens, at least for shrimp illnesses. Now, there is another type of bacteria. It's a little easier to spot. It's called rust spot disease. And it's a bacteria that eats away at their exoskeleton. And it's like a red rust spot looking thing. And they'll get little dots all over their body. And you can treat that. It won't go away. It might not look as red, but you can treat it and know that it's dead. The bacteria is dead. And then the shrimp will actually molt a couple times, and eventually will get rid of the hole that it created, as long as you catch it early enough. And so those are the most common things. And then there's one more outlier that is called, we call it Elabiopsidae. It's not actually Elabiopsidae. It's what we've considered for the longest time a green fungus, and it actually isn't a fungus at all. It's actually a green algae. And so the green algae, it usually only occurs in Neocaridina shrimp. And the reason it only occurs in Neocaridina shrimp is because Neocaridina's, like cherry shrimp, are caught outdoors in ponds, and birds are literally pooping into the water, and they're spreading this type of algae into the water. And the only time that the shrimp gets it is when it's exposed to the perfect conditions. So like it might have it inside of it. It might be remaining dormant. And then you put it in a tank with like super high light because you're dosing with fertilizer. And then all of a sudden this algae blooms. And so when we get all of our Neocaridina shrimp in, one, we pre-treat everything. And then we keep it as dark as possible to try to kill off that algae if we do have it. And then hopefully it doesn't ever happen for our customers. And then we actually have we invested into a complete setup that is to inspect the shrimp. So like we have a TV that's dialed in to be able to make the green algae basically fluorescent. And then we have like a micro or macro camera underneath where we put the shrimp. And then every shrimp that leaves Flip Aquatics goes through an inspection to make sure that's good. And just because like that's a disease that, or not a disease, I keep calling it a disease. It's an algae that is easy to spread. And the only way that it actually spreads, just so that you all know, is if you get it in your aquarium, if one of your shrimp has it, best thing to do, pull that shrimp out, put it in a hospital tank, just let it live out its life. If it does live into your aquarium and it dies, the first thing that the shrimp are going to eat off of that dead shrimp is the algae. It must taste phenomenal. They consume it right away, and then all of a sudden it spreads to all of them. So those are all the different types of illnesses that you're probably going to see with shrimp.
That's actually terrifying because my eyesight is so bad and shrimp are so small. I would probably not see any of that stuff. Thankfully, I have a wife with good vision. Now, I have to embarrass myself again. Rob, you've known me long enough I'm not afraid to share embarrassing stories, and I have an embarrassing shrimp story. But before I tell that,
I'm excited.
I need you to give me an example, because I don't remember the exact name, of a common really shrimp. Like
carbon really.
Okay, but
or
is there
a
one
red really?
Is there such thing as a black really?
Yeah. A black really is a carbon really.
Okay. So I'm at the Aquatic Experience in 2019, probably. And I meet up. Jason was there. I think you were there too. I don't recall. But I'm there hanging out with Chris Lukup, another god of the shrimp world. Mm-hmm. And the show's over. The show, like, everybody's going home. It's Sunday. Things are winding down. And it's me. It's Lukup. It's Corey McElroy. It's Lisa. Katie McElroy was there. Jason, you might have been there. I'm not sure. We're all hanging out. And Chris Lukup had aquascaped a beautiful nano tank for me as a gift, and it was amazing. And he comes up to me and he says, and we all know Chris, he's got a very strong German accent, easy to understand, but he comes up to me and he says, I'm not going to do the accent, but he says, here you go. And he hands me a bag of shrimp and he says, these are black really. And I was like, okay, cool. I know nothing about shrimp. Okay. So I'm like, all right, cool. And I say to Corey, I said, what did he say? He said, black really. And I'm like, really? Oh, okay. So these are black shrimp. And Chris says, no, they're black really. I'm like, so they're really black shrimp. Like, what do you these are black really. These are really black. No, these are real. I felt like the Who's on First skit. I'm like, so they're really black. No, they're black realies. And I go to Corey. I'm like, Corey, make this make sense. They're black realies. I don't know what that. They're telling me the right thing. They're black realies. So yeah. It didn't make sense to me. I felt like I was in a Who's on First skit. Please explain to me, 5 years later, what the heck does it mean for a shrimp to be a really? What is this?
So that's a really good point that probably a lot of people don't know. And there's a lot of like shrimp lingo out there that people are like, what is that? And so a really shrimp, it's a pattern. So it's RILI, or yeah, it's not two L's, I don't think. I don't spell very often. So we're going to go with it's RILI, and it's a really pattern, which means that it has a solid colored head, a solid colored tail, and then a clear midsection, or at least the midsection is a different color than the head and the tail. And so like a really good really pattern is like a completely solid head, completely solid tail, and then completely clear in the middle. But there's different like grades of realies and things like that. So that's what a really shrimp is. But there are a lot of terms out there like saddled shrimp. A lot of people are like, well, what is that? And you can kind of connect the dots, and it's like a horse saddle. So if you put a saddle on a shrimp, you can see on the back of the shrimp, there's the eggs making their way down the back, and that would be called a saddled female. And so it's her eggs going to her tail. She's ready to breed. And then there's buried shrimp, which means that the shrimp actually has eggs on their tail and it looks like a bunch of little berries. So there's a lot of terms out there. I remember when I first got into the hobby, everyone's like, oh yeah, go to your LFS. And I'm like, what is an LFS? Like, what is that? And so now obviously it makes plenty of sense.
It's embarrassing, but it's also not. I feel like anybody that was in my position at the time, they just kept saying that they're black, really. And I'm like, I believe you. Like, you don't have to keep telling me they're really shrimp. Like, I believe you. Oh, it was embarrassing. But anyway, I like to share embarrassing stories.
Oh, it's
Back
a good
to
time.
you, Jason.
So now that John's got that off his chest, you mentioned earlier that there are fish you can keep with shrimp. What if you had again, somebody who's just getting into shrimp, give us a half a dozen that are like, these are probably going to be shrimp safe.
Yeah. So know this going into it is when we say shrimp safe, what we really mean is shrimp compatible. So I'm going to give you a list of fish that will not eat adult shrimp. Now, that doesn't mean they won't eat baby shrimp that are like the size of a tiny little ant, because, they might eat them if they see them, but most of the time they won't hunt them out. And so the number one, because people want like something that's schooling in their aquarium, they want something that's swimming around. Otocinclus are always good, and I'll get to those, but they just kind of sit on the bottom or suck on the glass. So like there's nothing spectacular about them. But micro rasboras are by far my number one recommendation. So micro rasbora is a chili rasbora, an exclamation point rasbora, a mirror rasbora, a spotted rasbora. There's a strawberry rasbora. And these are all ones that are in the Boreras family, or the Boreras genus. And they are tiny and they're super cool. They're super beautiful. They have, some of them have a really deep red color with black spots. Others are just different patterns of black coloring on their side. And then moving on from there, another fish that I always like to recommend, now this one isn't as safe, they probably will eat babies if they want to, is an Endler. And there's a bunch of different types of Endlers out there. The one that I found to be the best is called an Endler's Liebherr, which is a wild type. And they are just such good parents naturally. They don't eat their own babies. And for the simple fact that they won't eat their own babies, there's very little chance they're going to eat a baby shrimp. Like, that's just not their nature. Whereas you might get another type of Endler, like our Santa Maria Endlers, just, there isn't a baby in the tank because as soon as they see it, they eat it. Now, those probably wouldn't do well with baby shrimp, but they would do fine with adult shrimp. And so those are like my number one recommendation if you want something swimming through the water. The next thing would be like something that's like a bottom dweller. So pygmy cories, Habrosus cories, love them. They're super peaceful. They're cute and kind of like fat and stubby. And so like I always recommend those. Pygmy cories, usually you can find them, almost anywhere. Habrosus cories are a lot harder to find, but they have really cool patterns. And so those two I always recommend. Otocinclus, I know I brought that up, is one that is like a really good algae eater, but it also is one that normally doesn't come in well to pet stores. So it's hard to find healthy ones. But the cool thing about them is they eat the exact same diet of what shrimp would eat. And so that's why I always recommend them. And then outside of that, I have one that is like my favorite recommendation of all time. And it's very specific. And maybe you guys have heard of this fish, maybe not. It's called a tiger teddy. It is a tiny, tiny live bearer that has like tiger stripes on its side. And right now it is by far my favorite fish. The babies of the tiger teddy is smaller than a baby shrimp. Like, they are microscopic and they're just so cool. They have literally 1 to 2 babies a month. They're super good community fish as far as like they get along with themselves. They never eat their young. They take care of their young together. And so that's like my favorite one right now. And then there's other ones outside of the ones I mentioned that probably would be good. Like, cories in general are pretty peaceful. So I would say there's a lot of cories that would do okay in a shrimp tank. Bristlenose plecos, like there's a lot of those that would do pretty good. A lot of whiptails would do good. I've known multiple people that breed shrimp with cories, with plecos, with whiptails, for the simple fact that the shrimp will help keep the eggs clean and not fungus. And so it's a very symbiotic relationship if you're going for breeding. And then there's other things that you could try. Like, a lot of people breed guppies with shrimp. I think it's a lot riskier, but a lot of people do it. So is it possible? Yes. And I'm sure there's a lot of other iffy ones out there that, you could try it and it might work. You could try it and it might not work. but people will say online that it is possible, whereas other people are like, no, absolutely, it's not possible. So there's definitely more options out there. Those are just the ones that I'm like, yeah, I feel comfortable recommending these for people.
In my bathroom, I have a 20-gallon tank with Danios, guppies, and cherry shrimp, and like 3 different types of snails. And the shrimp are breeding like crazy. Now, they're probably not breeding as well. They're not reproducing as prolifically as they would have if those fish weren't in there, but they're still reproducing and they're still doing their thing. So you probably...
What type of Danio is it?
It's the kind that I don't remember.
The zebra?
No.
It's the one that has, oh man, it has squares going down the body. It's like lake line, land-like. No. Daggone it, I don't remember. I'm sorry. I bought them from my friend in Virginia Beach. I love them. They're really cool because I love Danios. I love how crazy they are. And then Lisa got 2 female guppies from Diana Walstead, and they've bred like, I'm not kidding you, we have thousands of them. And so she's like, I'm putting some of these guppies in here. And
that's awesome.
They've been fine, and the shrimp are still reproducing. So, okay, listen. You've convinced a lot of people. There's a lot of people that are listening to this. We get millions and millions of people that watch
in the alternative universe, that is.
That's true. All over. We don't see the numbers, but we know they're there.
Yeah, absolutely. I've seen them.
Yeah, in the alternative universe.
Knows.
Doppelganger Rob has seen our views in the alternative universe.
That's
I was sleeping last night and I saw this podcast hitting 1 million subscribers.
Unbelievable.
So it had to have happened somewhere.
With a name like Rob Lupton on our podcast, it's bound to be our biggest episode ever. But listen, you've convinced a lot of people, and for lack of a better word, people are really excited now about starting up a shrimp tank. What would be your recommendation for the ultimate setup? They're going to start from scratch, which probably isn't a good thing because you'd want the tank to be nice and alive before you put shrimp in there. But let's change it up. Let's say they have a 20-gallon or whatever size you want it to be that they've been running for a while, but their fish died off and they want to try something new. They want to convert that tank, whatever size it is, to a shrimp tank. What is the ultimate setup for a shrimp tank?
Yeah. So first step is always get a GH and cage test kit. Test your GH, test your cage. That will tell you what you can set it up for. For Neocaridina shrimp, my ideal parameters is 10 GH, 5 cage, and then the rest of the parameters will work themselves out. Now there's small variations there, but that's the basic. So understanding what water you have to work with is always number one. And then from there, I would probably, let's focus in on Neocaridina. So let's say I want a really pretty blue dream shrimp, and that's what I'm going for. Then my thing is always like, okay, I need to pick out an inert substrate. Inert means that it's not going to buffer the water. It's not going to fluctuate the parameters. So I'm going to go with either like a cool gravel, like a black gravel. I might go with a sand. I like sand because, stuff can't fall down into the sand and, food get under there, pollute the water. So I would do a sand. I like white sand. Black sand is going to bring out the color more on the blue shrimp. White is going to dull the color on the blue shrimp. And that's the same, like anything that has a light color, white is going to bring out the color. Anything that has a dark color, white is going to dull the color. And so you can always manipulate, your type of substrate plays a big part in the color of the shrimp. So sand is what I would pick. I'd go with either like a pool filter, natural type sand, or I'd go with like a dark or brown sand. And then for filtration, I'm an advocate for Matten filters, which a Matten filter is very similar to a sponge filter. It just takes up a whole wall of an aquarium and it basically converts a whole wall of the aquarium into a sponge filter. And the reason I like it is because I like the flow that it gives the tank. It's not just like straight up and down as a sponge filter would be. It's kind of forcing it to the side and it kind of does like a figure eight. So Matten filters is always what I'm going to recommend. If you don't want a Matten filter because they might be a little ugly, they might not be the most sightly thing for a display aquarium, then I would go with a little sponge filter. And then from there, it's all preference. So for me, I'd get a piece of Malaysian driftwood. I would get a pack of Indian almond leaves, put one Indian almond leaf in there. I would get some plants. I always recommend moss. So like Java moss, Christmas moss, Taiwan moss. I just think it provides really good color contrast in the aquarium. I think plants are a really beneficial aspect to an aquarium. They convert NO3s for you so that you don't have to do as many water changes. The next thing I would add is I always keep my tanks with floating plants. It cuts down on evaporation. It also converts NO3s really quick, and then removing as the floaters grow and you remove them from the aquarium, it's basically like doing a water change. And so for a lot of reasons, I like that. And then from there, you're good to go. And then it's just picking, the type of shrimp, which in this case, we're doing Blue Dreams. Now, an area where a lot of people might get confused is, what do I feed my shrimp? And it really comes down to like, feed what you have available. Like if for me, I feed a lot of Northfin to my fish. So I have like Northfin Community, Northfin Bug Pro, Northfin Kelp, and I will actually take a lot of that and just mix it up and feed it to my shrimp, and they do great. Now, if you're going for the high end shrimp, like you want, Galaxy Pintos, it might make sense to get like, really specialty food. Make sure you have like a mineral supplement. Make sure you have, this calcium rich one. Make sure you have this one that's protein rich, and then rotate those, get a little bacteria in there. And so there's more that you could do, but if you're just setting up for Neocaridina, some Blue Dream shrimp, I personally just feed Northfin to everything that we have here at Flip Aquatics. So that's what I would recommend. And then from there, you're good. And then it's just sit back, enjoy it. And the biggest thing that you could do wrong, so don't do this, is constantly be messing with your tank. Patience, consistency. As long as you got the right setup, sit back, enjoy it. If you're impatient and you want to get a tank set up right away, know that there is live bacteria out there that you can purchase to put into your tank to cycle it right away. I don't recommend doing that if you have time to cycle it the right way, but it is a good alternative than, just waiting a long time to cycle a tank.
Gotcha. Well, Jason, it's on you. The awkward moment. We're out of questions now.
Jason, you're up, man.
I mean, I feel like we got a lot covered in this hour or so time. Is there anything more you want to add? I know how to reach you. You've got a YouTube channel out there. Talk about that. Talk about ways to get a hold of you. And if there's anything more you want to say about shrimp, please.
So this is what I always say is, first of all, if you're looking for information, always feel like you can reach out to Flip Aquatics. That's why I have a team that answers questions. Like, I want to grow the hobby that I love. Now, if in no way am I going to sit on this podcast and be like, hey, you guys have to come buy shrimp from Flip Aquatics, because here's what I want you to do. I want you to join a local fish club. I want you to trade with your fellow hobbyists. I want you to have relationships with people that you can trade. Hey, I'll give you 10 cherry shrimp and, you give me a breeding pair of guppies. Like, that is the joy of this hobby. And so that's what I always recommend. In no way me coming on this podcast is to encourage more people to buy from Flip Aquatics. But the reason that Flip Aquatics exists is because I want the people that don't have that ability. They can't get out of their house, or they live in an area where there's no local fish stores, there's no hobbies, or there's no local fish clubs. And so I want to be able to supply those people. And so if you're looking for shrimp, send us a message and we will give you all the information on how to keep our shrimp. But if you plan on getting shrimp from, if John lives right down the street from you and you're like, hey, or Jason, Jason's got the Blue Dreams, John's got the cherries, and you're like, hey, I want to get shrimp. The worst thing you could do is set up an aquarium with my advice and then get one of their shrimp, because they have bred those shrimp for so long. They have a certain way of doing it. They do water changes a certain way. They're used to a certain water parameter. They're used to certain food. And so the best thing you could do is be like, hey, John, I want to get 10 of your cherry shrimp. What do you do for your aquarium? What's your pH? What's your setup? And then just match to the best of your ability what they're doing. And so it's not like, hey, every piece of information on the internet is wrong. There's a lot of pieces of information that I disagree with, but that worked for that person. And so if you got shrimp from that person, it'd probably work for you too. And so I always like just being very clear of like, whoever's giving you the information, that's who you should be getting the shrimp from, because they're telling you how to keep their shrimp alive. And so every piece of information I shared today, a lot of it can be related to a lot of different shrimp in a lot of different areas. But if you wanted to get shrimp from Flip Aquatics because you don't have access to get them anywhere else, or you want to support us, then I will give you the blueprint to how to do that successfully. And so that's kind of why we exist. And that's kind of like my passion, my drive, is because I want to see this hobby grow. And it starts with having availability for everyone.
And one of the best places to get that information about shrimp is you've got your YouTube channel, Flip Aquatics. Check it out on YouTube. You've done a ton of videos. I remember I subscribed to you when you had like 2,500 subscribers, like way back in
That's
probably
crazy.
mid-teens.
10 years ago.
Yeah. So
Nuts.
Jason, don't close it out yet. I have something I have to say. If you could give me a second.
please do.
It's not another embarrassing story. No, this is actually something coming from the heart. Listen, Rob, we've known each other a long time, and I want to make sure everybody on this podcast knows how I feel. We work in a very competitive industry, and it's a very, dare I say, cutthroat industry by a lot of people. I like to associate myself with people that are good people, that are not looking at this as one big competition and don't look at me. You and I, we're looking at each other eye to eye right now. We're competitors. There are stuff that people could buy from me and they could buy the same stuff from you, but we're on here. We're doing this because you and I both feel strongly that we're all working together in this as a team. And Rob is one of the few people in this industry that I can actually reach out to and get advice to be more of a competition to him. That is so rare that people would be willing to do that. Rob and I's business is very similar, but yet I can still call whenever. And I know he's going to pick up the phone. He better. And he will offer up that advice. I just want to thank you for that. I want to thank you for being what you are for the industry. Thank you for being a good friend and a mentor. And I owe a lot to you. So I wanted to make sure I said that before Jason cut this off. Thank you for being a good person. And thank you for being an inspiration to other businesses like me. I'm out.
Well, I really appreciate that, John. I mean, that means a lot. And, you know, I hope that's the way it shows. Cause that's how I feel truly. And like, I don't just say this cause we're on camera. Like you could talk to me anywhere, anytime, and you'll always get the same version of me. Maybe some days I'm a little stressed. Maybe some days I didn't sleep very much. But for the most part, like what I truly believe in is like, I love this hobby. I truly love this hobby. And if I get to do it every day, that's awesome. And I know what I've experienced. I know the stories I've shared. John, I know that you've done presentations on like, you know, people that have shared stories with you and the impact the hobby's made on their lives. And like, it goes so much deeper. Like this hobby is just so good. And so like, if I can help other people help this hobby grow, then why wouldn't I do that? Like, it's not like, hey, this is a trade secret that I'm not telling anyone. Like the thing that makes our shrimp great is our quarantine process. And like, I tell you guys, like we treat for we treat with Maricin. We this is our treatment that we do. This is what we found out. We've tested on hundreds of thousands of shrimp. We've had 100% success rate. We hand inspect them. We dip them in salt. Like we give you every guideline to be successful and be our biggest competitor. If you wanted to be, and hey, if there were two of us out there that are doing this, I'd be like, finally somebody gets it. But it shocks me that it still hasn't happened because like everyone's just kind of doing their own thing and they just, I don't know. That's why our tagline is always, you know, setting the standard, because I never want to be somebody that is just complacent. I always want to raise the standard in the hobby for the animals, for the hobbyist, and everything else is secondary to that. Well,
you're doing a great job of that. Kudos to you.
I really appreciate it.
And you refuse to promote yourself on this, and so I'm going to do it for you. If you haven't figured it out or by now, flipaquatics.com. It's a great website. It's a website I look at quite frequently and say, "Deck on it. I wish mine looked that good." Rob has an amazing staff over there. We're not only friends with Rob, but we're a customer too, because you're a distributor for Northfin. Very nice to have that connection there. So, but flipaquatics.com is their website. They have a lot more than just shrimp on there. That's kind of what got it all started, but it's grown to be quite more than that since then. So anyway, I said I was out earlier, but I wanted to make sure that we got that in. I'm going to hand it over to Jason and you, Rob, to close this out. Otherwise, we'll never get out of here tonight.
Well, thank you, John.
John is closing out challenge, so he leaves the responsibility to me, but we do.
That's right.
Thank you so much for taking time. We know you are extremely busy. Thank you for taking an hour and a half out of your time to talk shrimp, and I hope everybody got a lot from that. And you are always welcome back on the podcast, and we really appreciate you being here. So have an awesome weekend. Have a great holiday season, and thanks again for being here.
Yeah, thank you guys so much for having me. I mean, what an honor to be able to hang out with you guys. I know, I consider both of you friends. We've been through a lot together. We've seen a lot together, and we have a lot of great stories together. And so, you guys even reached out and invited me on. I mean, I'll clear anything out of my schedule to make sure that this could happen, because what an honor. And, just to be able to hang out and talk with you guys for an hour and be a part of this story. I hope this continues to blow up, and I hope it continues to remain the most popular podcast in the entire world for aquariums. And it's just so fun to be here. So thank you guys so much for listening, and all of you at home. Hopefully you consider giving shrimp a try, or maybe giving shrimp a try again with some more information. So thank you guys again.
Well, everybody, thanks for being here once again. And we will be back same time, same place next week. Hope you have a great week.